Trust not even the most familiar voice. It may be a mimic.
My father and my uncle had this experience when they were kids. Fair warning, it might get a bit lengthy. My father and his elder brother, my uncle, were like best friends from childhood. My father used to live in a joint family and used to live in a very small village called Maharashtra State, India. The village is located a bit in the jungle with a population of hardly 500 to 800 people at the time. Farming was the main occupation with little to no electricity and also a lack of wall clocks, so they used to decide on their time according to the daylight. It was around 1966 or so. Now, I know it sounds like medieval times, but that was the situation for tribal people in India. So my father, then 8 or 10 years old, and my uncle, then 15 or 16, used to get up early in the morning, like around 4 a.m, and used to go into the jungle to cut the wood for daily needs like cooking, etc. But before that, my aunt, their elder sister, used to make some breakfast for them, like bakri, which is a kind of Indian bread, and sabji, curry. She either used to pack a tiffin for them so they could eat later, or used to deliver the food by herself in early dawn with my grandfather, who used to start the farm's work. The jungle was near the farms, and my father and uncle would go to a familiar area of the jungle which my aunt was very well aware of. She used to track them down easily, have their breakfast together, and then come back together with the wood logs. One day my uncle and father got up early in the morning as usual. It was still dark, and it was winter. Sunrise is a bit late during this season. My aunt was still sleeping, so they decided not to disturb her, and they picked up their axes and went for the jungle. That day, they decided to go a bit further than usual in the jungle, but in reality, they went way too far. They were not even able to see the lantern lights of the village. They started cutting a tree and gathering little sticks from around. They got very busy and concentrated for the time being. After 1.5 hours or so, my uncle got very suspicious as to why the sun was not rising yet. By this time, there were supposed to be birds starting to sing, and no rooster was making that typical morning noise. No cattle were mooing, which comes along with the shepherds. All that there was an eerie, deep silence. It was so silent, in fact, that my uncle got worried that they were more early than usual time, so he started to hurry up in his work. Now, before going on any further, let me be very clear about my uncle. He is a very tough guy. Nothing scares off the dude easily, and is respected by the whole village. Same goes for my father. But this time it was different. He didn't know why, but he was feeling that there was something very wrong, and something is watching them from deep jungle. And my uncle knew it better. It was not some tiger, cheetah, jaguar, or wild boar. He felt something was wrong that day. And then, all of a sudden, my father and uncle heard the voice of my aunt from a long distance. They couldn't see her, it was just a voice. My uncle got very suspicious, as the voice was coming from deep jungle and not from the direction of the village. My uncle told my father to tell her to come to them, so my father responded to her voice and told her to come to them. The voice stopped for a moment, and then she replied, "No, you come to me, hurry. I've brought you your favorite food." At this moment, my uncle realized what it is. He had heard a lot of stories from the villages of a voice which takes away people, sometimes never to be found again, or, if found, will be in a suicidal mental state. the locals used to call such paranormal entities as chakva, meaning the paranormal being who will hypnotically fool you to commit suicide. As soon as my uncle snapped out of his thoughts, he realized that my father, being a naive kid, started walking towards the voice and started responding to my aunt's, or the entity's, voice. It was taking my father's name and yelling, "Come to this direction. I'm waiting here with the breakfast." My uncle ran towards my father with full speed, grabbed him by his shirt collar and said, "Don't listen to her. Come on, we must go home." My father said, "But it's elder sister. She's calling us. I am hungry." By that time, my uncle has already grabbed my father's hand and told him, "She's bluffing with us. She has no food. Now come on." Now my father was about to start arguing with my uncle, but then he looked into my uncle's eyes. He certainly looked scared and his hand was shaking. Father too sensed that something was wrong and started walking fast towards the village, without a word uttered. "Why are you going towards that side? Come here, follow my voice," she said. My uncle, still holding my father's hand, said, "Ignore her. She's not coming to us anyway." No need to say he was trying to divert my father's attention and play it cool, so that he doesn't panic. As they were walking towards the village, they felt like as if it was an eternity to get there. Now, being a Hindu by religion, my uncle started mumbling mantras of Lord Rama, a Hindu god. The voice slowly started fading away as they were coming close to the village. My uncle took a long sigh of relief when the dog started barking all of a sudden from the village direction, and noticing that some of the village lamps were close by. The whole village's dogs gathered together and started barking and making that loud crying noise, like wolves. My uncle reckons the entity might have still been following them. My uncle and father almost started running towards the village, and finally reached the village. The voice was long gone, and there was this sense of lightheartedness. My uncle stopped near our ancestral temple, joined his hand, bowed his head and said thank you. My father was still confused of the situation. Once they reached home, my uncle and father saw that my aunt was still in her bed. Father, being a naive child, cursed her for beating them in the race. Turns out they both left the house way too early, as in at 2 a.m. or even earlier. And it was a no moon night, so it was dark already. My father got a fever for a few days, when my aunt told him that she didn't get up that morning, let alone making their food. But my grandfather and uncle knew better, and are thankful to God to this day.
So, last year, my uncles decided to retire, thus changing their city home for a house in a smaller place. I went to help them move, and the weirdest thing happened in the house. I would see my family, aunt, uncle, cousin, and a helper, in rooms that they were not in. And they also saw me. These encounters were recurring, and you could even chat a bit with whatever was mimicking us. And then you realised the other person wasn't in the house, or was in another room. We were all so busy packing and everything that we didn't notice until we sat down for dinner, and someone would say something like, "You offered to go grab me a beer and didn't come back." And the other person would deny ever holding that conversation. We also felt observed while in the house. It was an awful sensation, so much that we went together to get the laundry or take the trash out. Things we would normally do alone. At the beginning I was scared, but nor my aunt or uncle reacted to this. They just said that when they bought the house, 30 years prior. It happened too, and it stopped after a few months. I forgot to mention, it was a month of us moving. During that month, the toaster, the microwave, and the oven just started malfunctioning. The toaster even caught on fire, and something inside the microwave exploded. I have a theory that now that they were selling the house, and with all the movement, whatever was there awoke and started making itself known.
I had a haunting 9 years ago. I was a single mother with a 2-year-old boy and my 9-year-old niece. I had gotten custody of my niece due to her mother being an addict. We just moved into a nice apartment and I was so excited to be able to give my kids a nice place. It was newly redone. New carpet, new walls, new trim, new everything. It was a weird setup though. When you walked in, my bedroom was on the right, living room on the left, and dining room straight ahead. To the left of the dining room was a smaller bedroom which also had its own full bathroom. I think it was more for roommates than a family. I started having paranormal encounters the same day we moved in, so I always left both bedroom doors open at night so I could see into the kids' room past the dining table. From the start, I would wake up at 3:12 a.m. every night. A lot of times, my son would too, but would start crying. I would wake up to an old woman in my room. She would always stand in the hall that led to the master bathroom. She would always try to talk to me. I could never hear her. Then my son would cry and I'd go comfort him and go back to bed. But sleep was hard to come by for me. As time went on, she would bang on the walls where the water heater was, jiggle door handles, knock photos off the wall, wake me up every single night at 3:12 a.m. She got more and more angry that I wasn't doing what she wanted, I guess. So eventually, she started appearing as a black smoke-like mass. She would get closer and closer, mumbling something I couldn't make out. My cat would flee. I could feel her anger. I could feel the tension and frustration thick in the air. When she wasn't that black mass, she appeared more tattered and unkempt. Her hair would be a mess when it was once done up so nicely. She would look so tired, sunken in eyes, and became more and more frightening. Her behavior was downright aggressive. The banging became so loud that neighbors could hear it. She would rattle the doors violently. I thought someone was trying to break in, but no one was ever there. My dreams were cruel torments of me being raped, murdered, having my children kidnapped, every night. There weren't many nights that I didn't cry myself to sleep. I was doing my best to raise 2 kids, one of which wasn't mine. Work a full-time job and then come home to so much negative energy. I decided to ask my neighbors about previous tenants as they'd lived there for years. Apparently, a woman took care of her elderly mother. Her mother died in my room. The apartment was totally redone because that woman literally had to wallow in her own feces. The daughter was very neglectful, and the pets were also never cleaned up after. I also found out the reason I was able to afford that apartment was because the rent was significantly lower than other identical units. The manager of the apartments never told me any of this. Shortly after, I woke up again at 3:12 a.m. But instead of the old woman or blackness, I saw my son squatting on a dining room chair. I said, "Troy, why are you up?" He looked me straight in the eyes, smiled his sweet smile and whispered, "Mama, I got up to get him. As I reached out for him, he just vanished. My heart sank. I couldn't breathe. I thought something happened to him. I ran into the kids' room and they were both fine, sleeping away. I cried until I was totally exhausted and finally fell asleep. That's when I decided to break my lease and move. She would unpack boxes. She would hide things. She would turn the bathroom light off when I was in the shower. She was trying desperately to talk to me, and I had no idea how to listen. I mourned for her. I could feel her pain, but I also had a family to take care of. I had my stuff packed and moved in under a week. If you have any idea what it's like to be a single parent with 2 kids and a full-time job, then you know that was an amazing feat. I had a dream after we moved that there was a diary hidden behind a water tank. Why I never thought to look in there when that was where she kept banging. I just hope she found peace.
My grandma's house has some sort of mimic. I think that's the right word for what it is. But I've also seen people call similar experiences doppelgangers. So maybe that's the right term? My grandma's house has had weird goings on since, well, before I was born. Mysterious ringing phones in the basement, TVs, and VCRs with minds of their own, bassinets that rocked by themselves. Anyway, it seems one of them may be a mimic. My grandfather had a job that would take him out of town at times. On at least 2 separate occasions while he was gone, my grandma and uncles saw him walk down a hallway and out of sight. They thought maybe he'd come home without them noticing, but his car wasn't in the driveway either time, and he came home later, and he insisted that he had not been home. My mother also claimed that she used to talk to her deceased grandmother at night sometimes. It scared her, because she knew that logically it wasn't right. But it was her grandmother, so she felt safer about it. Knowing about mimics now, it probably wasn't her grandmother. And now, my personal experience. My sister and I used to spend weekends at my grandmother's house when we were younger, through high school even. We all slept in her bed, and my grandma would make us bacon and hot cocoa for breakfast in the mornings. I woke up one morning. I was still in a state of half-awareness. I opened my eyes and saw my grandmother leaning in her bedroom doorway, looking at me. I figured she'd just come up to see if I was awake yet. But then she leaned backwards, out of the doorway, and out of sight. Something about the way she moved just wasn't quite right. And that's when I realised I smelled and heard bacon cooking downstairs. It struck me as odd that she would walk away from bacon while it was on the stove. She was in her 70s at this time, and though she got around well enough for her age, taking the stairs was still a bit of a task, and it took some time. It didn't make sense that she would risk burning food on the stove just to come upstairs and look at me. She could have just yelled up at me to see if I was up. I called out to ask her if she was upstairs. From where I was, I could see out the bedroom door and down the stairs. She walked from the kitchen to the bottom of the stairs and said no, she was making bacon. I freaked a little. I got out of bed and booked it downstairs. My sister was already awake and downstairs with my grandma, which is why she was already making bacon before I was up. Both of them said that she had not been upstairs, so I told them what had happened. That's when my grandma told us the stories I told above, about seeing my grandpa when he couldn't have been there. So, yeah. I've been a little bit scared of my grandma's house ever since.
Background story. I used to live in Moab, Utah with my mum, her boyfriend and the boyfriend's brother, at a mobile home park. She worked as the mobile home park manager and pretty much took bills for people for rent, sign up new people to move in, help with issues around the park, etc. So she knew everyone's name there because it wasn't that big of a complex. So fast forward to us living there for a while. It was around 2 or 3 p.m. and I'm sitting on the couch in the living room, just chilling on my phone, waiting for my mum to get home because it was a boring day that evening. As I'm sitting there, I hear clear as day my mum yell my name. I heard her yell in distress, "Tiff?" Now some may think that someone else was named Tiffany in that park, but since my mum worked as the manager, she knew there was no one else in the park named Tiffany. And she is the only person that calls me Tiff because I prefer to go by Tiffany. So I'm sitting there thinking, what does she want? I figured she would yell my name again if she really needed me. Then a few seconds later, I heard her scream, "Tiff!" This time, she sounded more annoyed that I didn't answer her the first time. I sat there and thought to myself, her boyfriend's brother is outside on the porch smoking at the time. If she needs me to go out there, he would come inside and tell me that she needs me. So again, I stayed quite prepared to leave if I heard her again. And sure enough, she yelled Tiff again. She let that yell kind of drag on. So I knew she wanted me for something, and I thought she needed help. So I got up and was about to walk out the door when the brother came inside, and I asked him if my mum was calling me. And he just kind of stared for a second and said, "No," like I was crazy or something. I called my mum to ask if she was calling my name, and she said, "No, I'm at the store right now." I got off the phone and thought to myself, why the heck did I hear my mum screaming my name? Not just once, but 3 times, clear as day. When she yelled my name those 3 times, it sounded urgent, but not urgent enough for me to get up and run towards her. To this day, I think it was a mimic, because I'm the only one that heard her when the brother was outside and could have heard it much better than me. Good thing I didn't leave the first time and went off searching for her on my own.
About 6 or 7 years ago, a group of friends and I would hang out at a specific home being rented by 2 people in our group, one of whom I was dating. Relevance to come. The home itself was a duplex, and the guy who lived in the other side of the home was a friend of the group, and rarely ever home. On multiple occasions, we would hear voices throughout the house. Once, while I was showering, I heard the front door open and close then the distinct sounds of footsteps coming through the living room. When I got out of the shower to check, no one was there. There wasn't even a car parked in either driveway. My partner at the time had a fully fledged conversation with what he thought was his roommate, only to discover that he'd been talking to thin air. Oddly enough, that incident also occurred while he was in the bathroom getting ready for work. He heard his roommate come home, kick his shoes off, and proceed to ask him a few questions about his day and what he was doing. When he came out of the bathroom to continue the conversation, he opened the door to total darkness. No one was home, and the lights in the house were all off. One night, while having drinks with friends, I went inside to pour myself a refill and freshen up. Suddenly, a few members of the friend group rushed in, panicked, one of them holding his pistol. They proceeded to ask me what was wrong, and that they heard a man's voice outside, followed by my voice, crying for help. I assured them that no such thing had happened, but they were all insistent that it was my voice. There were countless other voices heard, especially those that mimicked the two permanent residents of the home and members of our friend group. Boot prints appeared on a wall in one of the bedrooms, proving absolutely impossible to remove. Most people constantly felt watched while in the home. Some people were slapped, others scratched. And eventually, no one would stay more than a few minutes alone inside. Not to mention, sleeping there was damn near impossible, due to the noises and the general dark feeling throughout. A door leading into the kitchen from the carport would fly open, despite being shut, and even, on a few occasions, locked. The house to the right of the property had a fenced-in pool, and on more than one occasion, when the kitchen door would fly open, so would the gate to the swimming pool. This house was not occupied. Most of the homes on the street were built in the 1950s and 1960s, so the history is recent and fairly innocuous. Unfortunately, in a horrific turn of events, one of our closest friends eventually shot himself while in his truck in the driveway during a party. None of us know if it was truly intentional or just a horrendous accident. But I've not been back to that house since 2014, and I can barely drive by it without feeling physically sick.
I was 15 and chatting on Gmail with my boyfriend at the time, past midnight. I believe it was 2 or 3 a.m. Whether or not I had the door slightly opened or shut, I do not remember. I heard my doorknob rattling, and I'm like, oh, I'm in trouble, because I wasn't supposed to stay up that late. I heard my mum whisper my name. She sounded annoyed. I turned around, and it wasn't my mum. It was this weird misty white figure that kinda looked like the painting, The Scream. Freaked out, I tell my boyfriend what happened, turned back around, and it was gone. I went to my parents' bedroom and they were both asleep. I woke up my mum to tell her what happened, and she told me if I see it again, to pray and ask what it wants. I didn't see it again until a few weeks later, or a month, I'm not sure, in the daylight. Nothing happened though. I was only walking down the hallway, and I looked at the restroom, which was slightly opened, and I saw the same figure peeking at me. This morning I was in my bathroom. The window overlooks my backyard, and I had the window open. I kept hearing somebody outside call my dog's name. They kept saying Monty, calling out as if to get him inside. When I listened closer, the voice sounded exactly like mine. Same tone, same deepness. It sounded as if it was coming from my own backyard, or perhaps a neighboring yard. I looked outside and saw nothing. No movement, no person, no dogs. I got a chill, and after a minute, the calling stopped. I figured maybe it was my mother, although the voice sounded identical to mine. When something scary happens, you try to rationalize it, you know? So I made my way downstairs and past my mother's room, where she was getting ready for the day. I asked her if she had let the dogs outside. She told me she hadn't been downstairs yet. When I went downstairs, Monty and my sister's dog Ruby were both laying on the sofa, exactly where I had left them when I went to the bathroom. I know it sounds insane, I do, but I also know what I heard. I heard my own voice calling out to my dog, as if trying to get him inside, which is a regular occurrence. I don't know if this is paranormal or a glitch in the Matrix or something else, but I'm still rattled about it. Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.